I'm going to invite our panelists to join us now. They're in the room with us. If you could please put on your video cameras. We have 6 people who joined us from a spectrum of Jewish organizations and represent a cross-section of ages and experiences. I will introduce each of them with just a single statement about who they are, and each of them will have a question for Imam Mohammed. And then if we have time, we'll go around to each of them a second time, and we'll take some questions from the audience. I've been watching the questions, and some of them I know will come from our panelists. Firstly, I just can't thank you enough, Imam Mohammed, for what you've given us today. It was a gift. We have Sam Eskenasi, the founder of La'ad Canada, Judy Freedman Kadish, a lawyer and co-executive director of Americans for a Safe Israel, and she is in New York. Lauren Isaacs is participating from Israel. She's the national director of Herut Canada and coordinator for World Herut in Israel. Anita Bromberg is a lawyer in Toronto and president of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation. Dr. Leon Kadish is an orthopedic surgeon and medical director of ProMed Evaluations and chair of the board of Doctors Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, and he is in Toronto. And Natalie Arbatman is joining us from California. She is a senior student representing the Zionist-oriented educational and social organization Club Z, or as we say in Canada, Club Z. And I will start with a question from Sam. So Sam, if you will unmute yourself, please go ahead.
Hi, Imam Tawhidi, thank you so much for speaking to us and for providing us that education. For us as an organization, that's our big focus, is research and education, so I found this immensely valuable. My question is sort of a two-parter, as many Jewish questions I'm sure will be. Firstly, in recent memory in Toronto and Canada, an imam named Ayman al-Kasari at the Toronto Masjid was quoted in the Toronto Star as saying, "Oh Allah, count their number, slay them one by one and spare not one of them. Oh Allah, purify Al-Aqsa from the filth of the Jews." According to the same article, similar statements were echoed by another imam, a Jordanian cleric, who was actually charged by the police in Montreal. Now, there's apparently many cases of people allegedly praying for Jews to be killed, and the question is, do you think that statements and sentiments like this are actually common in mosques in Canada? Is this like a mainstream sort of dialogue, or are these imams and leaders simply outliers in terms of the internal discussions that are happening there?
They are common, but they're not mainstream. So they happen every now and then, especially during the time of conflict. They do happen, but they're not mainstream. So not every mosque, every main mosque will do that, but they do exist. Now, here is what many non-Muslims don't know about imams. Imams, the majority of them, especially those who serve in organizations and centers, if they are not the founding presidents of the place, then they work for a board and for a center and for the mosque. If the president of the center has a particular direction, then the imam would automatically be serving in that direction in order to be able to feed his family, right? I'm an independent person. That's why I say what I say. That's why I do what I do. I'm an independent. Yes, I'm an advisor to the Global Imams Council, but they also have a degree of power over me, in the sense that you'll never see me wear short sleeve or wear shorts, right? You'll never see me do that. So there are laws that I have to abide by, but I'm an independent man. I can speak to whomever I want to speak to, and I can say what I like. The imams in the West, especially the man you mentioned, belongs to a center, which he needs to make sure he is making the board happy and the president happy, which means the problem is not only the imam, it's the entire center and the entire board. So perhaps you should research the politicians who are visiting them during election time, if there are any grants being given to them, if there are other issues going on in schools and whatnot. Perhaps, like we have in Australia, or in Austria, or even in Muslim countries, if you preach Muslim brotherhood talk, or even you pray like that, because those prayers are not in our prayer books. Oh God, destroy the Jews. If you do that in the UAE, you'll be in prison. Literally, the UAE has an app that's called My Safe Community in Arabic. If you see hatred, you can report it on the app. It's against the democratic view of things, but if anti-Semitism gets reported, they'll come and tell you to stop praying for God to destroy the Jews publicly. You can't do that as an imam. So one, it's much greater than just an imam. Secondly, imams are not that powerful in the West the way they are in the Middle East. They can't have 10,000 people out on the street rallying against Jews. They just can't do that. You know, what you see in the rallies, these are coordinated organizations with political support, media support, and well planned and whatnot. But an imam can't just go on Twitter and say tomorrow 5,000 people go in front of a synagogue. Nobody's going to show up, probably 15 people. So they don't have that degree of power that they do in the Middle East. So that's why you need to see where the support is coming from. And you'll be surprised to see who's supporting, who's visiting them election time. Yeah.
Thank you. Judy, are you ready to ask a question? Unmute.
Okay. Hi, I thank you so much for Imam for your really enlightening discussion. Couple of things. I am curious how many other imams have your kind of understanding of the words of Allah as being the words of God, and how many others are really open to the idea of making peace with Israel?
Firstly, I'm not special. You are hearing this probably for the first time because, or many people heard an imam like me speak the way I do for the first time because I do in English. There are many imams in Arabic who say what I say. I'm not bringing anything new. I'm not inventing anything new. I'm not fringe. I'm just telling you, I only follow the Quran. That's as Muslim as you can be, where I didn't even open the hadith. I didn't open what scholars say here and there, only the Quran. I don't do any of these liberal issues. I am a strict Muslim, and I want to make sure that Jews claim their land because God wants that. I am protecting my God. I am protecting my religion when I speak what I speak. So many imams in Farsi, in Turkish, in Arabic, who have been saying what I've been saying for decades. Nothing new from me at all. But I say it in English, and many people hear it for the first time in English. So they wonder if there are other imams. Yes, the Global Imams Council has a membership of over 1,300 Sunni and Shia imams. And they all know of my opinions. And they hear them from me in Arabic and Farsi and in English. And they read my tweets and they will listen to this. And not a single time have I been disciplined or called or rebuked. Nothing. Full support. Whether or not they'll be willing to go the extra mile as I would and risk their family because they live in the Middle East, you know, Iraq and so on, that's another story. But their belief, no problem. Not a single one of them. The whole council adopted the IRA working definition. Not a single objection came from any imam. In fact, the council has an imam in Israel, and not in Jerusalem, in Akko. They have an imam in Akko. His name is Imam Samir Asi, and he's an amazing man. So the council is on the same page as me. But again, there are many types of imams. There's an imam who focuses on counseling between marriages. There's an imam who deals with funerals. There's an imam who preaches. There's an imam who advises. Clerics have many roles. My role is a mixture between preaching as well as advisory.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Lauren to unmute.
Thanks so much. Imam, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for your commitment to peace and tolerance. It's really admirable. I really enjoyed what you had to say. I have a couple of questions. I hope we'll get around to them eventually, but one that is in direct response to what you were saying. So you read a lot from the Quran, and I do appreciate that. But I think my question, and it might be echoed a lot, I haven't read the chat by other people, I'm not sure, is that it could be seen as cherry picking. If we're playing devil's advocate. And while there are many extremely peaceful verses, as you pointed out, which is amazing, what would you say to those who point out other verses which are patently discriminatory or segregatory, or do encourage violence? Because if we just, thinking off the top of my head, I mean, there are verse 551, right? I don't have to quote the Quran to you, of course, but verse 533, do not make friends with Jews and Christians. Those who wage war against Allah, cut their hands off, stuff like that. So how do we reconcile that? And why do you give more weight to the peaceful verses as opposed to these ones that are not so peaceful? Thank you.
Okay. Firstly, I am not giving weight to any verses. I believe in all of them equally, even the ones you refer to as violent. The verse does not say do not take the Jews as friends or as allies. That is a wrong translation, and it's not your fault. The Arabic verse says awliya. Do not take the Jews or Christians as awliya. Awliya means people of authority, because the verse then continues to say those of authority over you are God and his prophet. So why was that verse revealed? Because Islam was an emerging religion, heavily dependent on what was in the Bible and the Torah, monotheism, and from Judaism and Christian teachings. So the Muslims naturally began to take the monks and the rabbis in the area to be people of authority over them in a religious context. So religion, Islam tells us, don't take the Jews and Christians as people of authority over you. Those of authority over you are God and his prophet. To me, that's something I expect you to say, well, that's fairly obvious. I don't have a rabbi and I don't pray in a synagogue. And if I tell you, well, you don't have an imam and the Prophet Muhammad has no authority over you, you'll say, of course he doesn't. I am a Jew, right? Or, I'm Christian or whatever you may be. So the verse means authority, awliya, wali, that's the root word, wali and awliya. Today, the Saudis refer to the king as their wali, a man of authority. So it's not about friends, because the Prophet married Jews. He married Safiya bint Huyay, and he had many alliances with Jewish tribes. And the Prophet Muhammad is the only non-Jew prophet from Noah all the way down. So we in the Quran have to accept all prophets equally, Moses and whatnot. So they are dear to us, and there's no such thing as, they're our cousins to begin with, Abrahamic cousins to begin with. So that friendship issue has been completely misunderstood in the English world. In Arabic, it's awliya, which means people of authority, divine authority. Secondly, the verses of violence, all of them come in a very specific context. The conflict between the Muslims and the Jews. Islam is not at war with Judaism, and it was never at war with Judaism. That's what Hamas and those guys preach. The conflict was tribal. It was tribal conflict. If we go back into the books of history, Khaybar, Bani Qaynuqa, Banu Qurayza, all of the tribes that were in Medina and Mecca at the time, or in the surroundings of Mecca, they naturally allied themselves with tribes that were at war with the Prophet Muhammad, and they were at war with the Muslims. So when the Muslims were fighting those tribes, it was fighting them and their allies, not specifically because they were Jews. Again, we're talking on a tribal context. So the Quran doesn't say the Jews should be killed at all. That doesn't exist. The Quran makes it very clear that when referring to these groups, they were referred to by their tribal names to indicate it was a regional tribal conflict. Does not mean it should continue forever. That's another issue. And then you have the verses that say disbelievers, non-believers. All of them came at a time of conflict. The Prophet Muhammad's main enemy who wanted to assassinate him was his own tribe, Quraysh. They were referred to as the non-believers because within the tribe, the Prophet Muhammad was a prominent man. So they split into two groups, the believers and the non-believers, but they were all cousins. So when the verses were referring to non-believers, they were referring to the Prophet and his own uncles at times who did not believe in him. Not necessarily people from other religion. And even if the verse says they don't believe in God or the last day, Jews do believe in God. Jews are believers. They're people of the book. We consider people of the book. In fact, Islam depends on Judaism in all of its theological and ideological pillars. You take Judaism out of Islam, the whole religion will collapse. You'll be taking every single prophet aside from the Prophet Muhammad, all of the books, halakha, the jurisprudence, the history, God's rights, what God wants, all of that history, all God's miracles that are in the Quran will have to be removed. Noah and the ark and all of that will have to vanish. Islam will collapse. So it's very important for us to understand the context of the verses. And again, the Quran is 300 to 400 pages. We have humans who write encyclopedias. God definitely has much more to say than 300 pages. God speaks to the Muslims in a situation where they were in at that moment. They were in that situation. And the verses are all limited in a lingual context. Not a single verse says, go out and fight now in the 21st century, or even after the Prophet died. It's all part of the development of the religion. Conflict took place. I say we need to acknowledge, we need to condemn the bad, and it does not order me to fight. I'll tell you what orders me to fight. I am ordered to defend Mecca and Medina, right? You can hear from me as I speak. I'm being honest with you. If you want me to fabricate and sugarcoat, Imams are the best at fabricating stuff and sugarcoating. You know, I can make it sound sweet to you and convert you or convert some of you. But I am honest with you. And that's why I'm always in trouble with the media. I only have to protect and die for Mecca and Medina and the holy sites which were established by God and his Prophet. If the Jews, anyone in this webinar, decides to go to Medina or Mecca and say that is Jewish land and put the flag of Israel, we will have problems because that is my land. Nobody's touching that. That is my religious land. I die for that land. We will defend it, we'll protect it. And I expect you to do the same for your holy land. So you're telling me as Jews, you don't want Mecca and Medina. You want your land, and you're showing me a title, a land title from my book. So I would have to be Satan to steal from Moses and Solomon and David, God's prophets, even if I don't like Jews, which I love you. But even if Muslims don't like, some Muslim extremists don't like Jews, stealing from God's prophets is a different story. That belongs to God's prophets and their nations who happen to be the Jews. Disagreements can happen. But it does not mean that the verses of conflict should continue until today. There is no such order at all. No such order.
Okay, wow, thank you. I'm going to call on Anita Bromberg next. Please turn on your video and unmute.
I am unmuted. Thank you, Imam. This has been very enlightening, and you can just tell from the chat and the questions how much you've brought a conversation forward that I'm sure will go on long after. But one of the questions actually repeated by a few of the attendees hits on what I wanted to ask you about. And that's this unofficial alliance, as one of the attendees put, that we are seeing between militant Islam, if you will, or Islamists And what's very prevalent here in Canada and Europe is what we call the radical left. And yet they seem to have so many things that are not in common, and yet they're joining forces. We see this powerful alliance in Europe. We've certainly seen suggestions here in Canada and North America, and we know that they've led to provoked numerous attacks, a lethal brew, if you will, of progressive ideology, dehumanizing the West, Israel, while the fundamentalists, carry on in a strong voice across Europe. And as I say, we see it in North America. It's making its way into universities, into the media, other institutions, right down to our high schools, liberal churches, and of course, activists in our political parties. We could all give many examples of that. So what do we do to counter this? I just want to note for everybody that I opened up your website and I see how courageous you are there. You say 4 things that you believe in, and I'll just quickly put it and then get to my question. But you say that Palestine is Jewish land, and you've mentioned that. You acknowledge in very strong terms the Holocaust and the need to understand the suffering and its present day ramifications. You reject all forms of anti-Semitism, and I say courageously, you adopt and promote the international definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA, which is something we do. So that right there puts you in opposition to most of the radical, if you will, left and much of the fundamental Islam views. Can your beliefs be used to counter this unholy alliance, if you will? What can we do to get more imams, other leaders to speak out the way you do? And would that be a solution to counter this alliance that is having such an impact on the Jewish community today?
Thank you very much, Anita. So in order to answer you, the first question about the alliance between the far left, and because I am, although many people don't think so, but I do lean to the left. So I believe in free healthcare. I believe in immigration. I'm an immigrant myself. I believe in multiculturalism. I believe in minority rights. I believe in canceling student debt. I do. But again, I believe in strong borders. I believe in sovereignty. I don't believe in sex education in classrooms. That I don't do, because my religion comes much greater than what society believes in. So I would lean to the left on some of the social issues, but the far left, here is the problem. I'm going to now switch back to what I would look like as an extremist and what I would speak as when I was an extremist. So you can understand how the extremists use the far left, okay? So you're telling me, as a politician, if I vote for you and I tell my mosque to give you 10,000 votes, you are going to take my message into parliament? You will side with the community in order to have Muslims who are fundamentalists in Congress and around the world? That's a good deal. How many votes do you want? I'll tell them all. We're going to run a campaign. Why? Here's why. Because you, the politician, you think in 4-year terms. The politicians think in 4-year terms, 8-year terms if they're feeling ambitious. An extremist thinks in 100-year forward. If I give you the votes, you're going to take me to parliament? You're going to come visit me and give me attention? Not the other Muslims who we don't like? The secular open-minded ones? That's a great deal. You must be very foolish, but I'll take it. That's exactly how we were like. If a politician comes to me and says, vote for me, I'll do anything for your community. I say, excellent. I'll give you the vote and you work for me. And the politicians The far left politicians, they will ignore every single person in their constituency. But they will, well, they don't ignore, but they are prepared to ignore, but they are never prepared to ignore a Muslim. And you try it, you have an inquiry and make sure your name is Muhammad or Ahmed. You get a response 1 week, 2 weeks, if they're very busy. My inbox is full. Or when you request a meeting, you'll hear back from them. I had a secretary of mine who had a non-Muslim name, Daniel. He used to write to the politicians on my behalf to request meetings. One time we received a response when the politician was out of office, an apology, sorry, he's no longer serving. That's how long it took for us to get a response. So we said from now on, we send it in my name, Muhammad Tawhidi. And that's why all these meetings with politicians and Prime Minister's office, because that's how they think, 4-year term, 8-year term. The extremist thinks in much greater terms, term lengths. So it's not really an alliance. It's not, the left thinks it's an alliance, but we don't, the Muslims know it's not really an alliance. It's appeasement. You are coming to us because you know we are right and you're wrong. That's how we were raised to believe. If we're wrong, why are you visiting us? If we're wrong, why is the Prime Minister coming to our leaders and muftis? And why? Because you know we're right and you need us. So we'll give you votes and you'll work for us. That's the mentality. And that's the Muslim Brotherhood mentality. Again, I'm just explaining, I'm not generalizing all Muslims. I'm just explaining why because again, the left doesn't ally, the far left don't ally themselves with all Muslims. Only those who are prepared to work with them and join forces with them. Not all Muslims would join forces with them. LGBTQ, that, not all Muslims do that. Not all Muslims.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Natalie Arbatman now to unmute and come on screen.
Mom, thank you so much for speaking with us. Really, your perspective is just invaluable and very eye-opening, and I think it gives hope to a lot of Jews, so thank you for that. Yeah, you mentioned in your talk, you were discussing kind of the scripture and the peaceful parts of the Quran, but you also mentioned that, you know, there are still a lot of extremists that aren't willing to interpret the Quran in the way that you do. And I know in the past that you have said that social reform, like what's happening in the UAE and Dubai, is sometimes, you know, another option, one that religious and scriptural reform can't happen. So my question is, what role do you think that the West and maybe Israel have in promoting that political and social reform? And if you could maybe touch on the Abraham Accords, and if you think that's, you know, a productive way to do that. Thank you.
Firstly, the Abraham Accords is valuable to the Jewish nation, valuable to Israel, but we all know they were always closet Zionists. We all know. You know, we all know that Saudi Arabia gave them the green light, the UAE and Bahrain. Otherwise, such a decision would never happen without Saudi Arabia's approval. And Oman supported. And Oman is a player, not a pivot in the region. So we all know they supported Israel. We all know. But the Abraham Accords was a nice way to package it to the rest of the world. You know, this is a new page, an official page where we can have embassies and ambassadors and all of that. Otherwise, they all know very well that the land is theirs. I mean, go on Clubhouse, and I don't know if you can understand Arabic. The Arabic rooms are in there, hundreds of people early in the morning. And they speak about how Israel belongs to the Jews and, you know, the Palestinians are the occupiers and everything's the other way around. So they know very well that it's Jewish land. So the Abraham Accords was just a way to package it and to make things official, put it in writing. It was verbal, now it's in writing. So we all knew it had existed on the ground. With regards to the interpretation and whatnot, why do we always care about what the extremists think? Why? There will always be extremists. Let them think how they want to think. Let them interpret however they want to interpret. They're not important. What's important is who is in power. Right now, the UAE is very clear that they're heading in a direction where they're beyond social reform. The Westerners, the non-Muslims love honeymooning and visiting the UAE. You know, it's even more open than some areas in America. The extremists are irrelevant. They are irrelevant. Their interpretation is irrelevant. Yes, they have some degree of power, but where is the Muslim world heading? Who runs the Muslim world? That's the question mark. Who runs the Muslim world? It's Saudi Arabia. It's the UAE. It's Oman. Iran to a certain extent, but they don't have Mecca and they don't have Medina. Mecca and Medina are in Saudi Arabia. They run the religion. I'm not Sunni, I'm Shia. They're Sunnis, but it's a fact we all know. They run the religion. So Muslim Brotherhood do not run the religion. They run organizations and people who are loud on Twitter. But psychology says you see a tweet, you forget it when you see the next tweet. It's no big deal. It doesn't change reality. It's not real life. They're loud, but it's not real life. We need to distinguish between these guys. Extremists are not important, because many times people tell me, or they come on Clubhouse and they say, you don't represent us. I say, thank God I don't represent you. I'd be very worried if I represent you. Very happy I don't represent you. Imagine that. Extremist says, good on you, Imam Tawhidi. I'd bury myself alive. That's the biggest shame. So we should not care about what they have to say at all. So they will always exist. Their interpretations have been twisted for centuries in every religion. They are the same group of people that we have in every single religion. Let them say what they want to say. We focus on what we know to be the truth. And I did not interpret anything today, by the way. The Quran, this interpretation game is something that's not real. The verses that need interpretation are the metaphors. In the verses I cited, there were no metaphors. And God says, he quotes, and Moses said to his people, these are quotations. They're not even God's words. God is quoting Moses. So there's nothing to be interpreted. It's like you reading a quote in any paper. A man told his people to go to a certain area. God told him to do so, and we believe in that. I'll tell you what could be a metaphor. It's the issue of Jews being turned into pigs. Okay, here is the catch. So the Islamists curse Darwin, and they curse Richard Dawkins, and they curse scientists, but they believe that Jews evolved from pigs. So if you don't believe in evolution, why do you believe Jews evolved from pigs? Either you're lying, your religion, your religious belief is false, or there's evolution, and you came from apes and they came from pigs. Which one is it? So they'll tell you, no, there's no evolution, and this is a miracle that God changed the Jews into pigs as a miracle. And here we come and say, a miracle cannot be a negative issue. A miracle has to be positive. There's no negative miracle. You cannot, a miracle is when you open someone's eyes when they're blind. When you feed people from a fountain out of the desert. That's a miracle. It has to be positive. It cannot be negative, because it's against the nature, the laws of nature. And in any case, a bit of logic alongside all of their claims destroys it, like this issue of evolution. But yeah, the extremists are very weak, and they're loud, they're rich, very well funded by governments, unfortunately, Qatar, Al Jazeera, the Iranian regime, and their friends. But, who thought 5 years ago that an entire Muslim nation, the UAE, would flip so publicly into open Zionists who believe in the state of Israel and want to travel? Who thought? If you told me that 5 years ago, I would have said impossible. And I'm someone who advocated for the acceptance of Israel. Nobody would believe you 5 years ago. But like that, it happened. What does that mean? That means the ground is ready for that. And these are people who don't believe they're going against God. They believe they're really serving their religion. God gave the land to the Jews. End of story. We're going to continue fighting. We can't continue fighting. So extremists are not in power. They will exist, but they cannot really throw us off track. They cannot. You're coming towards me as a Jew, and I'm coming towards you as a Muslim, and we're hugging. What's the extremists going to do? Rip us apart? They'll try every now and then, but ultimately, if we have the same focus, it's like a magnet. We're going to meet at one point, and we're going to build those bridges. And you have to make them irrelevant. We have to make them irrelevant by just ignoring them.
Okay, thank you. Leon, you've been patiently waiting. Would you come on camera?
Imam Tawhidi, it's a distinct pleasure to see you again. We already have quite a bit of history. We at Dara truly appreciate your unwavering support and friendship over the past several years. As one of our highly respected honorary directors, you make an important contribution to Dara's mission of monitoring and responding to racism and anti-Semitism in the scientific and most particularly in the medical realms. So of course, my issue today would be medically based. We have a history of Jewish-Muslim medical cooperation dating back to medieval times. And today we see Jewish and Muslim doctors and nurses working side by side collaboratively in Israeli hospitals. So my question to you is this: what steps can we take as health professionals in the diaspora to promote respect, understanding, and collaboration?
Brother Leon, thank you very much for your kind words. God bless you, and I truly appreciate it. And by the way, I'll say this publicly. You helped me with a referral letter for a master's degree in counterterrorism. If you remember, 1 year ago, roughly 1 year ago, right? I'm in my final exams and I graduate very soon. So that was thanks to Dara. I appreciate you very much. I believe that alongside my religious studies, I needed a counterterrorism degree to make sure we respond properly. That's where this geostrategic talk comes from, but that's largely thank you very much, brother.
Good luck for that, and remember our 10% commission.
100%, brother, 100%, 100%. The medical world is a very beautiful world because, you know, doctors take an oath and they are there to support everyone. And we also see Muslim paramedics in Israel and who volunteer with Megan David and whatnot. So I think to continue doing what you're doing is the best way forward. I mean, looking at images of Israeli doctors holding Syrian Muslim babies with his mother sitting next to him, and they're treating them. And I also saw an image of a nurse, an Israeli nurse, breastfeeding a young Palestinian child or a Syrian child because the mother was going through a lot of issues and medications. She didn't have the milk to breastfeed the child. And she was sitting there while the Israeli nurse was breastfeeding her child. It's just beautiful. There are so many images like that floating around where children have cancer and there's an IDF soldier making them smile or playing with them. Continuing in this path and also making it well known. Like, it's not good enough for a picture to exist somewhere on the internet. It needs to be done everywhere. Why? Because Hamas are using the same medical brand to push their agenda. So they stole a picture from, I think it's Grey's Anatomy. Is that the series?
Yes, it is.
That lady doctor with the blonde hair who played the doctor, I don't know her name. They took her picture. This is the Palestinian something Strategic Information Center on Facebook. They have a page. They took her picture from the cast and they said the French doctor has arrived in Gaza to heal the Palestinians who were shot by Israel. And this, so they use a lot of medical issues to win over the emotions. And Muslims are emotional people, right? We are people who, you know, for us, emotions are everything. Like most of our faith is based on what the Prophet did, how he did it, and what the reaction was. So it's a very pure way of determining the truth. It's a very innocent way, right? And it's also a disadvantage because there's so much propaganda that is directed at the Muslims by these extremists. So they're using that. They're using the idea of medicine being used to help them against Israel. If we start showing the world that the Israeli Jews and Jews outside Israel and the Muslims are working together to help all people, Muslims and Jews and otherwise, that would really counter that, you know, it's an entire wave of this medicine propaganda. I mean, what's his name? Saeb Erekat, who had COVID and died in an Israeli hospital, right? Most of them, they go for treatment inside Israeli hospitals. And we all know that. So I think to amplify, newsletters are good, Facebook posts are good, but we need to actually, there's a group on WhatsApp, and it's also administrated by Brooke Goldstein from the Lawfare Project, where all of our friends who are influencers online share information every minute. I had to turn my iPad off during the talk today. Message after message. It's so coordinated. They share a message, and then after a minute, it goes all over social media in multiple languages. That's what we need to do for the medical world. We really need that. We need to show people these, and I've been doing that as well on my social media, but myself is not enough. We need everyone to show this is what, this is how medicine is bridging between people, and this is the true humanity of Israelis and Jews. See, because we were raised to believe that when a Muslim child is taken into an Israeli hospital, they put the mom to sleep, they take the child, they steal his organs, and they sell the organs. Okay, and then so to counter that, you need more than just me and my social media. You need a movement to counter that. So I support you 100%.
Thank you. I know that the panel has other questions. I'm going to insert one here to follow up on what you just said about not taking the fundamentalists too seriously, dismiss the extremists. However, one of the factors in this whole bitter situation between, say, the BDS movement, Islamofascism, and Jewish defense of Israel is that any time anyone criticizes the person who is Muslim, no matter what they say, who they are, or what issue they have spoken of, the immediate label is that you're racist, you're Islamophobic, you're discriminatory, you get discounted, and you can't be, we are the ones whose reputations and livelihoods are at risk. Can you talk to that? I mean, can you say how criticism or questioning can be brought forward without destroying the lives of those who ask?
No, you can't, because that's how the far left wanted it. They created this culture to destroy those who disagreed with them, like what they've tried to do with me. They want to destroy. So if I come out and I say the imams who support Hamas are extremists, they're fundamentalists, they're liars, we need peace with the Jews, they say about me, he can't be a real Muslim. He's a fake. The real Muslim is the guy who wants to kill the Jews. They are the real bigots and racists because they don't accept someone like me because I'm not the right type of a Muslim. Whereas they're falling in their own trap. But again, I speak as a Muslim and as a Middle Eastern. I couldn't care less what someone with pronouns has to say, whose hair is purple or blue, and who doesn't know anything about the real world. You put them in a desert, they couldn't survive for 5 hours, right? We are men. We don't play these games. I will say what I want to say, and the left can do what it wants. And also the far right, they're also horrible towards me, right? They see me as no hope whatsoever. All Muslims, bad. There's no hope for us. All of us should be incarcerated. These people are also sick.
That's
Right?
true.
So we need to be
More courageous. We need people to be more courageous.
and also never stop.
Yeah.
The moment you stop, they've won, and the extremists have won. You cannot stop, because this is not an issue of society. This is an issue of your right and your God and your religion and your land. You know, Hamas doesn't want you to basically say that they are right. No, they want you dead. You know, it's not like they just want you to stop tweeting about them. No, they want to drive all of you into the ocean. So who cares at that point what the far left has to say and what they think? You're fighting an issue of existence. These are criminals, and even the far left knows they're criminals. So just ignore, because we get the same thing. We also get the same thing. We get called Islamophobe, but you open you go and you see who's saying it, right? Who's saying it? They're not real, they're not people we take seriously. Not
Okay.
people we take seriously at all. Where I come from, we don't take these people seriously, even if they are prime ministers or ministers or any of that. We don't feel threatened by them. Maybe in the West, they can destroy lives by going after your employer and after this and that. But in the Middle East, it doesn't work like that.
Well, we're coming down to the wire. I'm going to ask Sam to ask one more question before we wrap up, because I know you have a schedule that you need to keep, Imam Mohammed, and thank you. So Sam, can I call you back?
Yeah, thank you. So you touched peripherally on sort of what I was going to ask in this question, but I think for non-Muslims, it is sometimes very difficult to understand what the mainstream Islamic view is with regards to Jews and Judaism. So not so much Israel, but Jews and Judaism itself. So I was wondering if you can give us a bit of background on the perception of Jews as a whole, of Judaism as a whole. How did that change from the times of the Prophet Muhammad, praise be upon him, maybe through the pre-classical period to the classical period, and today sort of the tafsir, the mainstream understanding again of Jews and Judaism. Is it a corrupted text? Is it, sort of just a bit of background about that?
Okay, briefly, several points. The first is that the majority, the overwhelming majority of Muslims think that Jews are believers in Judaism, and that is a religion like Christianity, like any other religion, or like Islam. You embrace it. And they do not know, the overwhelming majority, they do not know that Judaism is an ethno-religion. So that is news to many Muslims, even today, because our scripture doesn't present Jews in that way. It presents them as believers of a religion, but it doesn't speak about their ethnicity. So that's where there's a lot of misunderstanding. Once we clarify that Jews and Judah, they are one, it's an ethno-religion, then we can, it becomes a lot easier to explain how they are tied to that land and how it's their capital and how whatnot, right? Because to me, it was very confusing 5 years ago. An atheist Jew, it doesn't, because it was presented to us as though Jews are believers in a religion, and they could be from many other countries, and then no tribes. Later on, we discovered that they are tribes, and they're all related genetically to each other, DNA and whatnot. So that's one issue, the perception and understanding of Jews. Secondly, from the very early years of the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, and there was conflict between the Jewish tribes and the Meccan tribes, who were Muslim and also non-Muslim, who were allied with the Muslims, versus Jews and those who were non-Jews, allied with Jews. They created a culture of anti-Semitism in Arabia that existed, but it was based on social issues. Like, once you lose a battle, that's it. There's no more propaganda, publishing books, signs, and boycotts. No, it was based on a score system. You beat us, fine. We beat you, fine. It was like that. It wasn't an Indian movie that kept going and going and going. It had its end, right? The Prophet then married from Jews. He became their in-laws and whatever. That's from the prophetic time. Then you have the scholars. The scholars accused the Jews of murdering the Prophet Muhammad by poisoning him. That's a great accusation. But again, the Prophet was said to have been poisoned 4 years before he died. So there's no real poison that is lethal that lasts for 4 years. And they say that it was given to him through a sheep. So if the sheep was poisoned, and then the Prophet ate the sheep, and then the lamb immediately killed the Prophet, then the lamb wouldn't have survived 4 years with the poison. So one of them wouldn't have survived, nor the lamb nor the Prophet. So make up your mind. That's a lie. That created a culture of anti-Semitism in scripture, in books, in history, and a lot of blames were thrown at Jews because Jews did not defend themselves the same way Arabs did. So if you tell a Jew, hey, by the way, there's a book that calls you and your people a pig, in most cases, a Jew will say, ignore, we're not pigs. You tell that to an Arab today. You go and you tell them that there's a Jewish author in this city who wrote a book calling all Muslims pigs. They would raid his house because Jews do not respond the same way the Arabians responded to things. So guaranteeing zero response opened the way for accusations and writing in books, and just especially it being in Arabic, right? You couldn't even read it. So that opened the way to blame them for everything, guaranteeing there's going to be zero response. Not a single rabbi will come and say, hey, hang on, you wrote this in your book, you're a scholar, you should be ashamed of yourself. None of that happened. Then you have the issue of 7 decades ago, the Palestinians who claim that the land has been occupied, and they've made it more important than Mecca and Medina. They've made Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, even more important. They've shifted the focus, and they've been successful in shifting the focus, and that's bothered many Muslims, where they want to revive the Islamic Caliphate and make its capital not Mecca, not Medina, but Jerusalem. That's what they say publicly, and it's available on Memory TV, and other world leaders are present and they say that. So this conflict, the current one, made a lot of scholarship be produced, a lot of religious text, all these prayers that you asked me about in the beginning. These prayers are not in our books of prayers. They are made up prayers to use to pray against the Jews and all of that. Not like God. It's not like God accepts these prayers because the Jews are doing really well and the Muslim neighbors are going backward day after day. So these prayers are not being accepted clearly, but they continue to keep that culture alive. So that's a very brief way to describe that history, my brother.
I know the time is short, if not done, but we do have one last question. I'd really appreciate if you could consider. Got a minute more? This is from our founding president, who we all have great love and respect for, Shirley Ann Haber. She points out that the Durban conference, number 4, I think, is about to happen. Thankfully, a few Western countries are staying out of it. We know that right off the top. The world community will be asked to re-endorse Zionism is racism propaganda, and there'll be many resolutions against Israel. This is the United Nations. I guess for many of us, we would just like to blow it up, certainly to discount it. But I don't know that that's going to be a helpful suggestion. What would you recommend to deal with Durban?
I think this will never end. I honestly believe that. I am someone who likes to approach everything realistically. Everything that happens in the world, I approach realistically. This will never end. And the UN is not gonna stop doing what it does, meaning its members. And those who chair it will welcome this all the time. So what do we do? Honest to God, what do we do?
Is there any value to membership in it anymore?
No, definitely you need value. You need to be a member, but sometimes you're a member of a place to be able to respond and defend yourself, not because you're supporting the institution, because that is what the extremists want. That's what the Palestinian Authority wants. They want you to withdraw from the UN so they can have the narrative under control. You know, they want that to happen. I think you should stay. I think Israel should stay and be present in even more sessions. And even if they don't want you there, you're a country, you're a sovereign state. What are these people talking about? Who are these people? Who is Abu Mazen? You know, to me, Israel is a sovereign state. That's how I see it. It acknowledges the UN that the Palestinian Authority go to complain and to vote against Israel. They acknowledge Israel as a state, the same way they acknowledge Saudi Arabia as a state, and the Bahrain and the UAE and Australia and America. These are sovereign countries, and Israel is acknowledged as a sovereign country. So let them say whatever they want to say. It's a sovereign country, and it behaves in a sovereign way. You see, my friends, the West has a view of countries. You can't do that. No, we can. Nobody tells Saudi Arabia what it can and can't do. Nobody tells the UAE what it can and can't do, because that is a sovereign country. Why is it when Israel wants to do something, it has to, before it does anything, issue a whole portfolio explaining why this is good and why? Why? The Palestinians in the UN and Hamas and all of these people, they should pray to God a million times a day that their war is with Israel and that their war is not with the UAE or Saudi Arabia. Okay, try throwing one rocket into Saudi Arabia and then thank the Iranian regime for funding you after throwing that rocket. See what will happen. And try hiding your weapons and rocks in Al-Aqsa Mosque and in the Dome of the Rock and throwing it at Saudis. Try doing that. Use that as a base during conflict. See what will happen. They will level you and the mosque with the ground. That's how they operate. Why? Because they're a sovereign state. And that is how the world, that's where we come from. That's how we grew up. Okay? That's how we grew up. That's our society. It's not like that in the West. In the West, there's human rights. Yeah, okay. But if you throw a rocket, right? The leader has two options. He sits and does nothing like a coward, or he responds. And in every case, it has been a response. In every case. That's why they don't throw rockets at anyone else who has embassies in Israel and who have Israeli embassies and who acknowledges Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, because they know Muslims will not tolerate this. It's only Israel, and Israel is to blame. See, again, I talk as an Arab. Israel is to blame, because if Israel behaves like the rest of the countries in the region and says, you know what, we're going to do what we want to do. We will defend ourselves the way we want to defend ourselves, whether you like it or not. Then the people will realize there's no point in attacking you. But when Israel continues to say, we are a democracy, we're the only democracy in the Middle East, every time Israel is mentioned, immediately after that, the only democracy in the Middle East. Who cares if Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East? I don't care. I don't care. Who said democracy is good? Look, now you have Muslim Brotherhood in your coalition. Is that good?
No.
Who said democracy was good? Who said? Israel is a Jewish state. Be it a theocracy, be it a kingdom, be it a democracy, be it whatever. They have the right to govern themselves the way they want. We don't tell Jews you're good because you're a democracy. We don't tell them we're going to let you live because we're going to give you support because you're a democracy. No. Today, democracies are seen as good. Maybe 5,000 years from now, people will be against democracy, the same way now they're against communism. So what, we're going to fight Israel because it's a democracy? 5,000 years from now, if the narrative changes? No. Israel is a Jewish state. It's sovereign. It's sovereign as a kingdom. If it wants to be a kingdom, it's sovereign as whatever form of government it wants to rule by. We don't tell Jews how to live and how to defend themselves and what their Torah tells them. Why do you tolerate it? Okay, try telling the Muslims or Iraqis what the Quran, how they should rule their people and how they should govern. Only Israel tolerates it. I mean, you don't really tolerate it, but the response should be equal to the response of those in the region. Foreign Minister of the UAE, whenever he's asked a question, his responses are in English, sometimes to the Western media, because CNN, they try to try their luck with the Middle Eastern politicians. They put them in their place immediately in English, and they don't even rely on the interpreter. They switch to English and they put them in their place, and then they go back to speaking in Arabic. That's how we live. And that's why nobody does the same thing to us. You live in the middle of all of us. But the Israelis want to operate like how California operates. You cannot do that. You cannot live in the middle of Arabs and want to behave like how they behave in Times Square, New York. That level of tolerance, you will not be able to survive. As a Jewish people, you need to behave tough because your neighbors are treating you in a very tough way. That's the only way. So stay in the UN like a fork in their eyes. Say what you have to say and don't worry about it. Don't leave the UN. I'm against it. Against leaving the UN, yeah.
Well, thank you for all the amazing advice, insights, and intelligence that you've shared. I can see from some messages that you've just been nominated to be the Minister of Communication for the State of Israel. And if you want to take that up, we will make sure that happens. I want to thank Sam Eskenasi, Judy Freedman Kadish, Lauren Isaacs, Anita Bromberg, Leon Kadish, and Natalie Arbatman. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but I really appreciate that you spent time with us and you've put a lot of thought into your questions. To everybody that listened today, you will get a copy of this webinar, and we will be following up with a very special 1-hour piece that we could not schedule today, but Imam Tawhidi has offered to have a dialogue with our friend, Mordechai Kedar, and we will arrange that, and you'll have another chance to hear him. And both of them, we love you, and we want to thank you and bless you and wish you the very best. Thank you for being with us today.
God bless you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for listening to my perspective and how it influences my thought and the region that I come from. I really hope that one day we can all not just live in peace, but live in love and harmony and defend each other the same way we see the West and Europe and the NATO and all, they defend each other. Our countries, who are your neighbors as Israelis, should form an alliance where we defend each other and love each other and care for each other. I really believe it's possible only because of what we saw last year and the recent developments and the rapid pace they're moving in. I don't believe we're wasting our time with these webinars and these conversations and social media activism. I believe this is real. It's finally happening, and we need to seize the moment. We just need a bit of focus and unity. It's up to us right now how we strengthen the current agreements and dialogue and bridges between our people, so that the coming generation doesn't look back and say, you had the opportunity, you failed, like Arafat and the guys. We did work much greater than what other people have been doing. Us people, right? So we should continue, and yeah, a lot of outreach is what is needed. A lot of outreach is what is needed. You know, we see Muslims in this group, and you know, I send them my regard, and God bless them all who are there and who are still here. Thank you very much, Andrea, and for your organization. Thank you, Leon, Anita, Natalie, Brother David, Sam, Lauren, everyone that was here, Judy. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Stay well, stay safe. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.